April 16, 2024, was a day like any other for Maria Jose. A young student of only 17 years old, she was calm in her home, located in the Primera Cerrada, 16 de Septiembre of the La Cruz neighborhood, in Iztacalco, in Mexico City, without knowing that a monster was waiting for the right moment to attack Maria Jose. He came face to face with Miguel Cortez Miranda, becoming one more investigation in a long list that seemed to have no end. But this was not an isolated case. They were about to uncover something far more perverse. When the authorities raided the perpetrator's property, they discovered that the young woman's case was actually the last of more than a dozen murders. The man, pretending to be a harmless neighbor and friend, he ended up showing his true face. Turns out on April 16, 2024, Maria Jose, a 17-year-old student, was in the apartment she shared with her family, not knowing that Miguel was hiding in the shadows, waiting for her mother to leave her house to attack her. When he watched the woman leave, the subject entered the home, which he already knew since he had previously entered. When the family was away, the young woman heard noises outside her room. But he didn't have time to react when he came face to face with the man. He tried to run away from the claws of that cruel being. She screamed and asked for help, but she could do nothing when he threw her against her bed and tried to abuse her, although Maria Jose never stopped screaming, in the hope that someone could hear her and save her from that subject. It is at that moment that the man began to struggle with her, fearing her call for help. "I could alert all the neighbors." Miguel began to strangle her. Then he removed his hands from her neck, leaving her breathing in agony. While she struggled to take her last breaths of air, the man searched in the kitchen for a plastic bag that he put on the young woman's head so that she would suffocate until she perished, calming her cries of pleading forever once his perverse act was perpetrated just minutes later. Mary Joseph's mother returned home, but it was too late. A man who looked familiar was quietly coming out of his home and walking toward her. The woman didn't have time to react, as she felt a cold that paralyzed her and an edge sinking into her neck, abdomen, and back. Wounded and on the ground, she saw the suspect flee from her house. The woman was losing a lot of blood, but she couldn't stop thinking about her daughter, so she went to her room. And he saw that he was no longer moving, so with the last of his strength, he screamed for help. The neighbors, for their part, heard the cries for help. They thought it was all a fight between the girl and her boyfriend, but when they saw her mother with a neck wound, they immediately called the police and emergency services. As soon as the police arrived at the scene, and thanks to the statement of Maria Jose's mother, who pointed out that the subject had gone up the stairs of the building, and the neighbors, who did not let this subject escape, were able to arrest Miguel Miranda, who was trying to hide in another apartment. A photograph of the detainee was broadcast in the news that scandalized everyone, in which he was seen smiling aboard the police patrol. His grotesque smile, as if unaware of the gravity of his actions, chilled the blood of all onlookers. The subject was transferred to the Oriente prison in Mexico City, while the mother was urgently taken to the hospital in a delicate state of health. They also treated Maria Jose, who was lying dying inside the room. But unfortunately, the doctors could do nothing to save the life of the young woman, who died at only 17 years old. Her family couldn't believe that Maria Jose had left so soon. The girl was in high school, and I was going to college soon. He was already preparing to take university entrance exams. His dream was to be a motorcyclist, like his father, who that same year was going to buy him his motorcycle as a gift for his 18th birthday. Unfortunately, the young woman never came of age. No one could believe that this young chemist had done something so heinous. But when the authorities raided his apartment, they realized that they were very wrong. Miguel Cortez Miranda was not who everyone thought he was, and he had eluded the authorities for years. Investigators found shocking evidence that seemed to indicate that he was a serial killer. Bloodstains, a saw, cell phones, and identity cards of several women were some of the evidence they found in the home. But there was something much worse. Police found 5 human skulls. The community was horrified by the findings that seemed worthy of a horror story. Miguel began to be called the feminicide of Iztacalco, and they even compared him to the American serial killer Jeffry Dhamer, naming him the Mexican Jeffry Dhamer. At his arrest and subsequent interrogation, Miguel showed no sign of remorse or guilt for his actions. On the other hand, he was ecstatic as he revealed details of Maria Jose's murder. The man confessed that he felt a frenzy, that his mind had clouded, and that he only thought about attacking the young woman without measuring the consequences. He said that he asphyxiated her with his own hands, and that he then looked in the kitchen for a plastic bag that he placed over her head so that she finally lost her asphyxiated life. According to his confession, his goal was not to hurt her any longer. His goal was to deprive her of her life because he didn't want to cause her any more suffering. Miguel Cortez also showed a worrying serenity and coldness when narrating the attack on his victim's mother, named Cassandra. According to him, with the unexpected presence of his mother, he considered that the situation had gotten out of hand, being forced to attack her too until she perished. In his own words, Iztacalco's killer described the moment as a moment of panic. At that moment he was still in a state of frenzy, and knowing that the situation was much worse, he took a wooden-handled saw-type knife that was near him, and he did the same with his mother, trying to take her life, but this time with a knife. According to him, there was no other way out. He needed to get rid of the only witness to the events, to the surprise of the investigators. Miguel justified his behavior by arguing that he had been abused by his own father and that his mother and sister never protected him from this abuse. According to Miguel, his father loved his sister Claudia more and was never proud of him. Their father died in 2021 after falling ill with COVID, and so far his sister has not confirmed that the abuse stories were true because of this. Over the years, the man nurtured a grudge against women in his adulthood. She had a closer relationship with her sister Claudia, who thought that bond was genuine, or so she believed, because deep down her brother hated her, because although he tried to equal her in everything, it was never enough. The people closest to the criminal, even his sister, could not believe that Miguel was the same one who had committed the acts. He simply did not fit into his calm personality. Did the subject hide his psychopathic side very well, as no one saw him coming? Did he never give any hints of his actions? Miguel Cortez Miranda was born on October 25, 1984, in the Gustavo Amadero mayor's office in Mexico City. He was the second son of Miguel Cortez Miranda and Maria del Carmen Miranda Moreno. His father was a bacteriological chemist, and he taught classes at UNAM, and his mother dedicated herself to household chores. Both sons followed in his footsteps, Miguel, studying to be a bacteriological chemist, parasitologist, and his sister Claudia became a pharmaceutical chemist. When it came to studying, his parent used to be very demanding. Both Miguel and his sister were very studious, and this made his parents proud. But not everything was as good as expected. Since Miguel began to show strange behaviors, he sometimes used to throw acid at cars, even animals, with whom he had fun making them year. His first job was at the age of 23 in a laboratory dedicated to the analysis of water and food. After 2 years, he began working at Ortin Laboratories, a specialized analysis company that processed samples from all over the country. It was then who decided to become independent and moved to an apartment in Iztacalco, where 10 years later the authorities would find evidence of his most atrocious acts. his fluency in 3 languages, his good financial background, his international trips, and his extroverted and sociable charisma distanced him from the typical profile of a criminal subject. No one imagined that he was actually a cruel and ruthless being without feelings. After the facts came to light, the people who knew him reconsidered his past attitudes, which seemed to confirm what everyone already believed, that Miguel Cortez Miranda was a psychopath. According to his sister, everyone in the family considered him a calm person. The image they had of him did not show that he was aggressive. He belonged to a dedicated, hard-working, intelligent person, the calmest. The one who had accomplished the most things as a good person, who didn't hurt anyone. In her statements, after the dark truth was revealed, the woman confessed that the last time she interacted with her brother she looked good, expressed herself well, and was even calm. It was inconceivable to her now that he was the monster. A psychopath is a person with marked emotional insensitivity. Although he usually shows a charming and seductive facet to the outside, this generates a double life where the subject can belong without problems to social groups, while hiding his misdeeds without any effort. This was the profile of Miguel Cortez, a complete serial killer, someone who won over his victims, who easily generated trust. He seduced her with his pleasant false profile until he revealed his true face. The ferocious murderer, the narcissist, the manipulator. According to his co-workers, Miguel was a low-profile, reserved, calm, and quiet person. However, he had attitudes that made him uncomfortable. Still, they didn't want to leave him out of their after-hours meetings. On several occasions they had met at the subject's house, not knowing that they were in the place where they perpetrated their crimes in one of those meetings. They ran a test that was about whether you were more of a psychopath or a murderer. Everyone took the test as a simple game, harmless to pass the time without knowing that they had hit the target. Miguel's result was forceful. He was a murderer with his co-workers. The chemist was very shy with them and didn't usually interact much. They saw him as a strange but harmless fellow, not realizing that this premonition was wrong. In addition to his strange attitudes, one day Miguel arrived at work with his face scratched, and according to him, it had been his cat's. Although the man did not have pets at the time of his arrest, Miguel had the same scratches. They had always been his victims. After 2 years working in that lab in 2013, Miguel resigned and joined the Animal Equality Foundation. Although on the outside he looked like a young man concerned about the welfare of animals, his real purpose was to get close to the women and gain their trust, and later invite them to his apartment, where the real terror began. They succumbed to Miguel's pleasant treatment, not suspecting that everything was a facade. Miguel was an imputable person, that is, that he was fully aware of right and wrong. At the time of committing the crimes, the chemist was cunning on the outside, appeared to be a harmless man. Therefore, when the raid on his home occurred, the investigators could not believe what they had found. The remains found in the apartment were of at least 20 different victims, and along with that, tools to dismember the bodies, surgical material and chemical substances were found. The criminal knew how to drive perfectly due to his profession as a chemist. And not only that, but there was also a journal in which the killer had recorded how and when he stalked his victims and the way he was perfecting his murders. With each case, he felt more confident. Among the many confessions, the femicide from Iztacalco recounted precisely how about 10 years ago he had disposed of the body of his alleged daughter, newborn. According to her writing, she had thrown the baby's body in the same place where she disposed of the bodies of her victims. But his confessions were not only in his intimate diary, but he also made it on his personal Facebook profile. The man shared poems that hid clues to his sick acts, but in a subliminal way. The poems were just disturbing. One of them was, "I will miss you." That the authorities believe I dedicated it to Frida Sofia Lima Rivera because I had published it 6 months after her disappearance. In this text, Miguel Naro, it didn't take me long to realize your hands didn't move. I found out your body was hard and I got scared. When I noticed you were cold, I touched your back and it was nothing but your clothes. I touched your neck and it was nothing but a stone. It was obvious that the subject was recounting how he ended a woman's life and then decided to keep her lifeless body. Later he continued his grotesque and sickly tale, rock as cold as ice, hard as iron, and worst of all, motionless as a statue. My face changed. I know because I felt it and because my tears, also tears of happiness, became tears of despair. I wanted to be by your side, but not like this. And if they thought it all seemed to be a harmless poem, full of disturbing metaphors, then he wrote something more disturbing. Long ago I saw you perish. You died buried by small crystals. Your skin was stained with blood, and your body changed hue to a scarlet red covered in blood. I put you on an altar and wept at your feet. I decided to stay with you, or rather, with your inert body. I'd expect you to open your eyes at any moment, or just succumb to your feet. This and other poems demonstrated the tranquility with which the murderer lived, knowing that no one was investigating him. For all the lives he'd taken and counting, although many of his internet friends had read his literary creations without noticing anything strange, Miguel mocked in each publication the ineffectiveness of justice, who seemed not to see all the signs of an unbalanced person who seemed to want to be discovered, bored that the police were not up to their standards. The Attorney General's office of Mexico City could no longer sit idly by. The number of victims was overwhelming, and public opinion was pressing with the cry of, "Sir, ma'am, don't be indifferent. They murder women in front of the people." Relatives of his possible victims marched in important points of the city and at the door of the prosecutor's office, refusing to stand idly by, demanding that justice finally put the executioner behind bars. Curious and full of helplessness by the disinterest of justice, they reached the door of the apartment building, where the remains and belongings of half a dozen women were found. Protesters covered the facade of the building with banners loaded with pain. In addition, they denounced that the local Attorney General's office rejected conclusive evidence that helped the man could continue with his acts with complete freedom in defense of the authorities. The city prosecutor stated that Miguel Cortez Miranda was basically unstoppable because he had not shown violent or aggressive behavior in his daily actions. Faced with this response that demonstrated that the authorities wanted to wash their hands, the victims' families did not swallow these excuses for them. The authorities had all the means to locate the missing young women, but they didn't want to. Finally, pressured by public opinion and the indignation of the population, the authorities managed to establish that the chemist's first murder was in 2012, the others in 2015, 2018 and 2024, all of them committed in a period of 12 years. One case that attracted the attention of investigators was that of Bibiana Elizabeth Garrido. Missing since November 30th, 2018, and a possible victim of the serial killer, this young woman was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer who worked in the same laboratory as Miguel and with whom she maintained a friendly relationship. Another possible victim was Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 22, to whom he apparently dedicated the disturbing poem. At the beginning of 2012, Frida had just arrived in Mexico City. Coming from a humble and large family in Tlacotepec, a small town in the Sierra Negra of the state of Puebla, the young woman settled in an apartment in the same neighborhood where Miguel lived, in Iztacalco. It didn't take long until at the beginning of 2013, Frida and Miguel met and maintained a close relationship, without her knowing that her new friend's true intentions were perverse at those times. Miguel gave the young woman a book called The Perfume, Story of a Murderer, which tells the story of a serial killer who through a chemical process extracts the aroma from decomposing bodies. This gift could indicate that the two had a relationship beyond friendship. However, it is unknown whether or not there was a romantic relationship, although in some accusations, both shared romantic hints on Facebook. On Sunday, December 7, 2014, at 3:50 a.m. and 7 p.m., Frida made her last post on Facebook that said, "I'm not going back where I came from, I never look back." Just 4 days later, on December 11, 2014, Miguel published his very disturbing poem that was apparently dedicated to Frida. A month later, in January of that same year, Miguel shared memes about jokes about dying, as if mocking. Which makes us think he was done with her by then. On February 7, 2015, the family of Frida Sofia Lima Rivera traveled 3 hours from her town to Mexico City to report her disappearance. Several weeks had passed without news of the young woman, but to her surprise the authorities downplayed her and told them that she would surely have left with her boyfriend, and he'd be back soon. But Frida didn't come back. She was never heard from again, and the police never bothered to look for her. If they had only investigated his immediate surroundings, Miguel Cortés Miranda would have been arrested many years earlier. Another young woman who was manipulated and deceived by this man was Karen Ornelas Baltasar. Last we heard of her, she was at a party, nothing less than organized by the alleged criminal. The young woman worked as a clinical labor technician in Nortin, where Miguel was also employed. Karen was 21 years old in December 2012 when her family reported her missing. The authorities once again did not give importance to the complaint, and she was finally found dead near the Iztacalco metro facilities. It was at that instance that the police got to work, and she took statements from several people around her, including Miguel, who said that he had left her on the subway. The killer wasn't afraid to say this, which could have made him the prime suspect, because he knew the police wouldn't do anything about it. The girl's friends, who also attended the party, declared that Miguel had accompanied him to the subway, but that he had taken a couple of hours to do so, which was suspicious, and they were right, which may have been the key to finally arresting him. For the authorities, she was just another witness, and they concluded that the girl died due to bronchoaspiration due to alcoholic congestion. However, his family did not agree with this. The alcohol he'd drunk couldn't do the kind of damage that ended Karen's life. It turned out that the victim's body had bruises on his face that were evidence that someone else had caused her death, and they were never able to find the belongings that the young woman was carrying on the day she disappeared, including her cell phone. Unfortunately, the authorities did not give importance to this, and concluded that the blows were the result of a fall, due to his state of drunkenness, and the file was closed forever, as a simple accident, another regrettable case. It was Amairani Roblero who disappeared at the age of 18, in August 2012. At that moment, the family had their sights on Mikel, and did not hesitate to report to the authorities that he had been the last person to be with her, since he had accompanied her to collect some photos from her high school. Once again, the investigation did not advance, and they never heard of his whereabouts again. Like Maria Jose's family, they were devastated by the case of her daughter, as young as the criminal's last victim. Amairani dreamed of a future that was snatched from her hands. She wanted to study law to defend innocent people, because there was a lot of injustice in her country. Unfortunately, justice did not do the same for her. That day the girl left her house for a course to enter the university, and unfortunately, she never returned, even though Miguel was the main suspect when evidence and messages and calls made to the missing young woman were found. Subject was never investigated. Another alleged victim was young mother Viviana Elizabeth Garrido, an industrial biochemical engineer at AR Laboratory, a quality control services company. There he met Miguel, who quickly became his friend. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana Garrido left her job and walked towards the subway to return to her home. But the young woman never arrived at her house, where her 9-year-old daughter was waiting for her. She was never heard from again. Another alleged victim was Claudia Andrea, 36, originally from Cuautla, Morelos, with whom she apparently had a relationship. The girl had moved to Mexico City in 2013 to study a bachelor's degree in chemistry at the National Polytechnic Institute. There he met Miguel. Over time they became boyfriends. However, in 2019 he appeared lifeless in his apartment. In an advanced state of putrefaction, the cause of death was classified as a natural death, although months later, when verifying the young woman's account statements, her family realized that someone had used her bank card and had made different purchases, which is why they went to the prosecutor's office again to investigate the incident. In all cases, there was a pattern that was repeated and that justice did not want to see. The area where they were last seen was in close proximity to each other and close to this subject's home. If the authorities had noticed the clear connection between the disappearances, today we would have fewer cases, hence the importance of the geographical profile in criminal profiling. The Mexican capital and the state of Mexico face a red alert due to the growing violence against women, an urgent call, which should motivate the authorities to intensify investigations into disappearances and femicides. It is crucial that effective measures be implemented to protect the rights and safety of all women in the city. There are many cases that demonstrate this, such as when in 2018 the Ecatepec monsters, responsible for the death of 10 women so far, were captured by the authorities only after they were found pushing a dismembered body through the street. In a baby stroller with total freedom, another case that occurred in Atizapan, in the state of Mexico, in 2021, the serial killer Andres Mendoza, better known as the Atizapan Monster, who was only captured thanks to the identity of the last dismembered victim, the wife of a police commander. Hundreds of bone remains were found in his house that revealed years of impunity and injustice. It seems like history repeats itself over and over again, and that the only way to capture them is when they make a mistake, as has been the case with Miguel, who was only captured thanks to the quick action of the neighbors and not thanks to justice. How many more women must die for justice to do something? Finally, after more than 10 years of total impunity, Miguel Cortez Miranda was prosecuted with preventive detention on charges of feminicide against Maria Jose and attempted feminicide against her mother, so she will remain detained in the Oriente Men's Preventive Prison for the 6 months set by the judicial authority as the deadline for closing the investigation that will take him to trial, according to justice. His other acts cannot be judged at the moment. Does this mean the first trial against the criminal will focus on his last victim, Maria Jose, of whom there was strong evidence? There is still no certainty about the other victims. They are all speculation. Once the analyses of the remains found in his home are confirmed, they will have to be judged separately. Claudia, sister of Miguel Cortez Miranda, shared that she and her family visited him and asked him to confess all the acts he committed. The woman told him to understand that it was over and that it was best for Arturo Gonzalez to confess. Defense lawyer for Maria Jose's family pointed out during an interview that the subject does not regret what he did and pointed out that he is fully aware of everything since he did not deny the facts. On the other hand, The victim Apos' family is protected by the authorities after having been granted all the security measures for the capture of the criminal. Through a statement, Maria Jose's family revealed the current state of health of her mother, Cassandra. Relatives pointed out that their mother's recovery process is being slow and thanked the medical staff for their care. Furthermore, they mentioned that they regret the re-victimization of Maria Jose's case due to the videos, audios, and images circulating on social networks, mentioning that these had been disseminated in a dishonest and kinetic manner. Outside the victim's home, family and neighbors placed flower altars accompanied by some photographs of the girl, along with messages of affection and vigils as a sign of solidarity. The girl's father revealed that the funeral will be postponed until the mother is discharged, who still does not know that her daughter died. The young woman's defense lawyer declared to the media that the minimum sentence that Miguel could face is 78 years in prison, which means that he would currently spend the rest of his days behind bars. The areas of research follow to learn about all the lives that Miguel Cortez took. So far, genetic tests to identify the victims found at his home are in process, among which it is presumed that they could include former couples, students, and ladies-in-waiting who had a relationship with him in the last decade. Unfortunately, it is possible that there will be more victims than those already mentioned. So do the authorities. That he could have dissolved the bodies in acid, taking advantage of his knowledge as a chemist. So far, the prosecutor's office reported that 3 victims were identified. However, the identity was not shared, although they assure that the families have already been informed about the results of the genetic tests on the remains and indicated that they continue to work with the remains of other 2 possible victims to identify them. While no one expected a person like the chemist to commit such acts, the most important clue that the officers ignored for years came from the women close to Miguel, who suspiciously disappeared without a trace. The relatives of the young women who never returned home did not stop raising their voices and denounced that the local Attorney General's office rejected conclusive evidence that benefited that subject from being able to continue his acts with complete freedom. Making a mockery of justice in more than a decade, the prosecutor's office did not take any action against this murderer. Unfortunately, the actions of the authorities were terrible or non-existent, and if it were not for the actions of the neighbors, in the case of Maria Jose, the culprit would still remain free, and with total impunity. The candidate for the Senate in the 2024 elections, Veronica Juarez Piña, filed a complaint against Ernestina Godoy before the Attorney General's office of Mexico City, where he accused the former prosecutor of alleged omissions in the case of Miguel Cortez Miranda. According to her complaint, the former prosecutor knew that since 2012, the subject had been exhibiting this criminal behavior, and that since 2020, they had information about who he was, where he worked, where he was, what his data were, and even witness statements, and yet he did not act. The authorities would have pointed out his alleged relationship with the disappearance of women in Iztacalco before the case of Maria Jose. Apparently, they pointed him out as an alleged feminicide who operated in the vicinity of the Coyuya Metro. However, they did nothing to stop him. It is regrettable to see how justice has declined over time. Technological advances in criminal matters and exhaustive preparations are useless, to which investigators are subjected. If the authorities themselves are the ones who stop investigations, the objective of studying antisocial behavior and crime prevention has been far removed.